Welcome to Gigging, everything in the sharing economy, and I'm your host, Mark Anthony Peterson. This is the show where we talk about the sharing and gig economy that will be worth $335 billion by 2025. In today's episode, we ask the question, what is the future of background checks? Let me give you my prediction on the future, and then we will walk through the facts and see how I came to that prediction. Sounds fair? Then let's get to it. First, I think social media companies like Facebook will eventually merge with big data companies like Equifax, providing them with unlimited data to confirm your identity. Why? Because they will become the major players in verifying who you are as you move forward in the digital economy. It's more relevant now than ever because of Russian hacking and the thousands of fake accounts that are making up social identities and disrupting the democracy. You have to have a way to thwart that, and the best way to do it is to give social media companies the tools they need to prove that you are who you say you are. So eventually that will occur. Once that happens, they're going to need you to lock that identity down with a biometric. So these social media platforms will integrate biometric technology, which they're already doing, to give you the unique one-to-one account capability that you will use as a premium service. Now, for those who want to continue to operate in an anonymous world, you're free to do that. But for those who want to move and use this sort of data as a way to get a job, you're going to move into premium accounts that still may be free, but they'll be validated with real data and locked down with biometrics. Once that occurs, these premium accounts, these premium social media accounts, will become the tokens that are used to unlock job applications in the gig economy. You are who you say you are. That account will unlock the application because you will verify it with a biometric. And gig work, no matter what it is, if it's online or offline, will become available to you because of these platforms. Sounds strange? No. The majority of gig transactions today are already being found through these sharing platforms. It's not a stretch for these sharing platforms to be morphed into social media platforms because that's what they are already. Glorified social media platforms without the capability of verifying your identity. The next thing I think that will happen is that social media tech companies will team up with screening companies to collect the public information needed to continuously verify your credentials. Notice I said credentials and not background moving forward, because that's what's going to be more important is that you verify your credentials and verify your rights and privileges. And rights and privileges are going to be linked to your behavior, both criminal and non-criminal, in order to gain access to the jobs that are going to be in this new economy. The next thing, fourth, the social media companies will then tie all of that, believe it or not, to a FICO type score that gives you access to premium services or locks you out of even basic services if you don't comply and perform by the standards that are laid out by society. And then finally, these companies will use all of that data, all of what you put into it, to create a predictive analytic model that will not only tell you what jobs are best for you, they'll predict whether or not you're going to commit a crime. That's the future. Now, how in the heck did I get here? Okay, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's break down what a background check actually is. A background check is made up of many different components. Typically, you start with a social security trace. That's where they take your social security number, run it against a database that includes information from Equifax, TransUnion, the big credit bureaus, to determine if your social is unique, matching one name, one social, and verifying the address history that you've listed on your application. And then there's a credit check. The credit check is also managed by these same bureaus, Equifax, TransUnion, and others, that provide a score based on your payment history to determine your credit worthiness. Now, can be critical to a lot of companies looking to see if you have financial distress, which may provide some sort of indication of your willingness to commit a crime because of your indebtedness. So banks and brokerages and other sorts of employers may want to consider that as part of a pre or post hire screen to determine whether or not they're going to keep you on board. The criminal check. A criminal check has many components that make up a potential criminal check. You can have county level checks where you're checking for criminal history at the county level where you live. State level checks, obviously, that is a statewide check looking for that same criminal history. And then federal, nationwide checks where you are checking all 50 states to see if there's some conviction of criminal, misdemeanor, or felony actions against the individual. You have drug tests. Now, drug tests are getting trickier, as you probably can guess, from all the passage of marijuana laws that are making it legal both recreationally and for medicinal purposes in 26 or so states now. But drug tests look for substances that can impair your ability to work. It's particularly in sensitive industries like transportation. The next component is the sexual offender registry. Now, a sexual offender is someone who has committed a sexual or sex act where the federal, state, and local laws require them to be placed on a registry. That registration can be a minimum of 10 to 15 years, or in some cases, lifetime registration, depending upon how the sexual act is categorized. The education check confirms your degree or the dates attended at institutions of higher learning. The OFAC check, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, checks to see if your name is on a terrorist list or if you're some trafficker of narcotics or drugs. Credentials or certifications are also checked. That depends upon your profession or industry or background. Employment verification checks do basically that. Confirm that you were employed at all the places that you list on your resume. A driving record history, or MVR, motor vehicle record, can check the status of your license, traffic accidents, driving record points. Checks also check for traffic law violations, convictions, and fines, as well as DUIs. You have a liens and civil suit check that checks to see if you have a lien or, yes, a civil suit against you. And then finally, you have E-Verify, which confirms that you have the right to work in the United States by verifying your social and that you are the unique owner of that social. These components can be configured into 4 different levels or types of background check. A level 1 background check basically does a name-based criminal search at the county, state, or federal level to determine if you've committed a felony that would disqualify you from working. It checks your employment history and may even do a drug test. A level 2 background check does a state or federal check using your fingerprints, your biometrics, to confirm whether or not you have committed, again, felonies or even misdemeanors in some cases that would disqualify you from obtaining that job. A level 3 background check is typically a professional or a management screen that looks at your degrees, your credentials, your certifications, and tries to confirm whether or not they're authentic. A level 3, just like a level 2, includes all of the components from the previous levels. And then finally, there's a level 4, which is typically called an executive background check, and that includes everything from levels 3, 2, and 1, plus some sort of financial background screening, credit check, plus other in-depth financial screens, social screening of your social media platforms, character liability checks where personal interviews are done with people who know you the best, more like a reference interview, and then liens and civil judgments are also confirmed with this level 4 check. Everybody got it? Kind of get those components and those levels? That's the world as it exists today. And it got that way because up until the gig economy, the majority of the workers were full-time employees at companies that typically stayed in place for a very long time. So you could screen them using these different levels, get a pretty accurate picture of who they are at the time they start the job. And because they rarely move, they own assets, they stay within a single county, these checks were one-time shot Johnnies that they never had to do again. And if you moved up in the company, they just moved down in levels in terms of the background check to discover more about you before you are put into those new roles. The world is changing. By 2030, more than 50% of the U.S. workforce will be gig workers. And these gig workers are not staying in the same place. They don't want to work full-time jobs. They aren't buying houses at the same rate as full-time employees, making it much more difficult to screen them and give them the rights and privileges that full-time employees currently have at Fortune 500 companies. On top of that, you have a lot that's changing about the current world, making it more difficult for the current process to stay the way it is. The Ban the Box Initiative. The Ban the Box Initiative is aimed at taking the question of whether or not you have a criminal history pass off the job application, forcing employers to deal with that after a hire or a contingent offer has been put forth to the applicant. The thought behind that is that many good qualified candidates are being kicked out of the process when they state they have a felony or a misdemeanor conviction on their record. The thinking is that if employers didn't know they had this history, they would hire the employee, giving them a chance at rehabilitation. Don't think that this is just a liberal policy being put forth because of the current climate. You have conservatives like the Koch brothers who are pushing this initiative as well, because we do have a shortage of workers. And there are lots of good people who have made mistakes that aren't typically given a chance in today's environment to work because they have to check the box saying they have a criminal history pass. So many states, including California, which is at the forefront of this movement, have opted to ban the box and allow you to give conditional offers and do post-hire screening to discover whether or not these crimes truly disqualify them from doing the work that they applied for. And there are many instances where you can make a credible argument that if someone committed a crime that had nothing to do with the job description, you're at very little risk of that individual doing harm to the company. And of course, the Koch brothers have done extensive research to show that those types of individuals have a lower rate of recidivism than people who are working at the company. So, ban the box, making it a dicier approach to doing background checks. Asking for salary history. That's also falling in the same bucket as ban the box. That's more of a post-hire question, or even if it can be asked at all, for reasons related to pay differences across the genders. There are also limitations on the use of credit checks for reasons that you could probably also guess. People who've gone through the financial crisis can be great employees with low credit scores, and that could eliminate them from getting jobs. Obviously, if you use those as a way to disqualify them, you're going to put them in the doom loop. They never get a chance to improve their credit situation if they never get another good paying job. So let's sum this up. Even if the gig or sharing economy had not arrived, and we were still in the middle of a world where corporate America was dominated by full-time employees, doing the traditional background check the way it was done 20 years ago would not be easy, because access to all of the publicly held information and privately held information is becoming extremely difficult. Screeners and companies are finding it difficult to gain access to the information to screen employees. Criminal history, salary information, credit information, drug screening information, all of that's beginning to be more difficult to gain access to prior to hiring someone. Most of this has been pushed into the post-hire world after the individual is already within your four walls. And that's before we even start talking about the gig economy. So let's now layer on how the gig economy is going to make it even tougher for employers or third-party providers to screen in this new paradigm. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, by 2030, or 2020 even, if you look at the Intuit report, half of the U.S. workers are going to be contingent workers or gig workers. These are part-time employees who will not be working with your firm full-time every day. And they may end up working with other companies after they've wrapped up an assignment with you. They're going to pop around on average 2.5 to 3 jobs, gig jobs, that they will have and not necessarily dedicated to you or your industry. The next big trend, gig workers are buying fewer homes than their predecessors. Because they have less money and they aren't working full time, one, they won't qualify in the traditional way that banks have required in the past by having an employment history or even the down payment to buy a house. What does that do from a background check perspective? It means it's going to make it more difficult to do a county or a state level because gig workers are moving around. They're hopping around, chasing the jobs and not necessarily staying put in one county for any particular length of time. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you're typically in one spot, it's going to mean you're going to commit crimes in the areas where you live. If you bounce around a lot, there are going to be crimes that may be missed if you limit the criminal check to just a county, because a gig worker may have 3 or 4 different addresses tied to their name now that are outside of a given county or even state. That's why that SSN trace and identity lock becomes so important. I got to know who you say you are. And then I got to be able to link you to that social so I can find all the addresses where you've lived so I can do a thorough check before giving you rights and privileges. Gig workers just made that more difficult because they're not staying still. They're not buying houses at the same rate, making that process a dead one when you're trying to produce a very good background check report. What's the next trend? You have a growing percent of gig workers who are documented and undocumented workers. The Bureau of Labor Statistics states that 20% of the workforce as it stands today, the civilian workforce, is made up of documented and undocumented immigrants. If the same holds true in the gig economy, you have 20%, 2 out of 10 individuals where it's going to be tough for you to perform a standard background check, particularly if you're looking for education and criminal histories that date back to the times when they lived outside of the country. That's going to be tough screening. So how do you figure out whether or not to hire or fire if you have 2 out of 10 individuals that don't have enough history or credible sources where you can find out what their intentions are before you hire them? What's the next trend? The next big gig trend is that the majority of the gig jobs are moving into transportation. Yeah. In a 2018 article written by Christopher Rugaber entitled "Why Gig Workers Are Now Looking for More Traditional Jobs," driving makes up 56% of all gig work, up from just 6% in 2013. Selling items through such online sites as eBay and Etsy has shrunk to 19% of gig work, down from 72%. So driving for services like Uber and Lyft is becoming the majority of gig work, and that has certain implications on the background check. Drug testing, yes. MVR, the motor vehicle record checks, yes. So certain elements in the background check are going to be critical moving forward, and the speed at which they can be delivered are going to be critical to the companies that are driving this portion of the economy forward. And what makes me think that's going to be critical? Because the pace of these transactions are increasing. So these high-risk face-to-face gig transactions where someone gets in your personal car, doesn't know your name, doesn't know your background, and asks you to take you from point A to point B, those are increasing at an ever-increasing pace. A September 18th, 2018 article by TheVerge.com celebrated the fact that Lyft had just crossed a major milestone when it completed its 1 billionth trip. The article went on to state that Lyft took 6 years to reach that goal, which is about the same amount of time it took Uber to reach that goal. Further on in the article, they explained that after achieving its 1 billionth trip, it took Uber 6 months to double that, to go from 1 to 2 billion trips, and less than 12 months to go from 2 billion to 5 billion. So the rate of growth in the transportation segment is off the charts. But as we will hear next, these gig workers don't want full-time jobs. They want flexibility, and they want the ability to get money and get money fast. Payments.com in an August 22nd, 2018 article state that gig workers crave flexibility and they don't want a full-time job. Stating, the shift away from a 9-to-5 full-time jobs indicate that more workers view juggling gig work as a viable career path. Furthermore, the article went on to state, 25% cited flexibility as the top-rated motivator for pursuing a career in the gig economy. Payments research also found that the younger the gig worker, the more likely flexibility is to drive gig economy participation. The article concluded in saying that in the second quarter of 2018, Payments found that 59% of gig workers use the digital marketplaces to find the gig work. The majority said that they use these platforms to find work-related leads. However, awareness of the marketplaces, or more specifically, the lack thereof, continues to be a significant barrier for gig workers to make greater use of digital marketplaces. So they're looking for a centralized source. Now, if we step back from that, we see growing numbers of people moving into the gig economy away from the FTE full-time equivalent world, that they are more likely going to be in the transportation space. They're going to work multiple gig jobs. They're looking for flexibility. They're buying fewer homes, and they're going to be 2 out of 10 of them that will have backgrounds that are going to be more difficult to screen with traditional sources. That's a lot. That's going to change the way we think about background checks moving forward, right? Okay, now that we know the situation between background checks and the gig economy, let me throw a little bit more into this soup. The complications. First, gig companies were never expecting to pay for background checks when they launched these companies. Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, none of these guys expected to have to invest in background checks in order to make their models viable. Incidents that got put into the paper is what forced them to start having to screen and comply with traditional screening methodology in order to, 1, limit their liability, and 2, keep their names off the cover of the Washington Post and the New York Times. Second, gig workers don't currently have the tools in-house to do any sort of screening. They're set up to do the business model that they were designed to do. If it's getting you in a car and moving you from point A to point B, or making it so that you can rent out your home to any guests coming in town, that's what they're set up to do. They aren't set up to try to screen the masses of people who are using private assets to make money. And then finally, the traditional methods of screening aren't netting all the problem childs. Lyft had an incident where one of its drivers in California used false data and was cleared and then ended up raping a woman. How do you stop that with the traditional methods of screening? You first have to lock down the identities before you even start the screening process, and that wasn't done here, so this guy fell through the cracks. Anybody else can fall through the cracks too. So you see a gaping hole that's going to be further exploited in a gig economy where transactions are either going to be anonymous, virtual, or one-time high-risk transactions where you may never see the driver again. The temptation to slip through those kind of cracks will be great if the financial need is there. So what are gig economy companies going to do in the short term? Short term, they're going to start bringing the screening in-house. And you're already seeing that. Uber, Lyft, they are contemplating it. Airbnb went out and purchased their own background check company and made it an in-house resource that they use to screen some of the hosts that they have on their platform. You're going to see a movement towards that in the short term. 1, to try to cut costs, and 2, to start developing some of these new capabilities that minimize the size of the cracks that these participants in the gig economy are trying to slip through. The second thing is that you're going to see more of these gig companies push that cost back onto the people who want to participate on their platforms. And you're already seeing that in the home repair market, where you have contractors who come in and perform pretty high risk transactions and that interface with the homeowner. They're already paying to be screened, bonded, and licensed as part of their state licensing process. And so they're accustomed to it, and they pay to be on these platforms to get access to more jobs. But you're going to see that start to happen more and more on transportation platforms like Uber and Lyft as they try to get this cost off their books and onto the books of the people who drive. If driving and transportation becomes the biggest part of the economy, you can expect that the consumer then will become the driver behind controlling access to their background check, because they're going to need it to pop around to 3 or 4 different jobs. And they will start to ask the question, why can't I reuse the background check I just got for Uber at Lyft? And why can't I use that one when I'm trying to deliver for Deliveroo or for Uber Eats? So as you see the consumer become a greater part of the screening discussion, because they're taking ownership by paying for it, there's going to be a demand to have better services that help them minimize the amount they have to invest in order to get access to work. But somebody has to give something up to get that. And that means you're going to have a place to store it, a way to uniquely identify yourself with it, and a way to be able to carry it along with you from job to job so that you maintain the work histories as a part of your rights and privileges that may be shared across multiple companies. What's the final thing these gig companies are going to do? Well, they're going to try to get rid of the labor altogether. And that's a separate track that we can keep our eye on. It's not going to eliminate background checks. It's just going to shift where they need to be done. But they're going to try to go with autonomous vehicles and robots and things like that to try to minimize this labor. But until that shows up, the first 2 things that they're going to do are going to change screening altogether. They're going to get it off their plate and put it on the workers. And the workers are going to turn around and say, I don't like the way this industry works. I want to have a screen that's updated, maintained. I will pay for it as a service or a subscription, and I want it to be able to travel with me from job to job, only updating the pieces that need to be updated if that new job requires it. So if I need to have an enhancement to my background check to gain access to a secure location, only do that because you've confirmed my identity, you've confirmed my social, you know my criminal history is up to date. So why do you need to repeat those in order for me to work for this third company that's asking me to come on board? And that's what the consumer is going to demand. So with that backdrop, let's work through the components of the background check and let's see if we can make sense of them under this new paradigm. The SSN trace, the social security trace that we talked about earlier. Yeah, it's going to still remain relevant because that's going to be the one way to determine all the different places I need to look to at least establish your account on this new platform where you're going to pay and keep it active and share it with multiple employers, right? So that one will be critical. The credit check, I'm not necessarily feeling that because as the gig worker moves deeper into the economy and not using all the traditional payment sources, right? The payments.com said that 33% of gig workers without a regular full-time job are paid through PayPal. So they're not going through the traditional financial institutions. They're going through the gig institutions, and you're not going to find them showing up on places like Equifax. So you're going to need a whole new type of scoring system that today is not Equifax if you truly want to measure the risk of a gig worker. So that one's going to morph into something different. It's going to be a score, but it's not going to be based on the same sources that we've traditionally looked at in the past. Criminal histories. County, irrelevant. State, irrelevant. Federal, yes, critical because, as I mentioned, gig workers are going to be more mobile, going to have fewer assets like homes, so you're going to have to look in more places to make sure they're not hiding criminal activity that could disqualify them from being a participant in some of your higher risk transactions. But that's going to end up also being modified. Right? Modified in the sense that it's not going to be a one-shot Johnny the way it used to be with full-time equivalents, where you screen me on day one before I'm hired, and then I could work there for 30 years without you rescreening me. The federal check will now be a part of a continuously monitored check to confirm that you're clean every month, every quarter, every year, whatever the standard that finally establishes itself for an industry or a sector, that is the level at which you'll be continuously screened for those sorts of behaviors. Almost like an alert service that will be set up at the federal level that will pump this into this platform whenever anything pops up. By the way, this sort of alert service is already functioning in Florida with FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Now, how do we make sure that it's you? Yeah, they're going to lock that part of the screen down with a biometric. So the level 2 background check that I mentioned earlier, that will be part of the standard that will get you onto the social media platform and lock that credential down and be able to continuously monitor it going forward. In a past life, that's exactly what we were building. A fingerprint system that would warehouse and resubmit for that worker and not inconvenience them while they're working. That thinking is going to reemerge. Drug test. That's going to be removed from pre-employment and be pushed into post-employment and probably put in the same bucket as the criminal history. If the majority of the gig work is going to be transportation, then you're going to need to screen for drug testing, but that drug testing is going to have to be a little bit different, particularly in areas where you have the legalization of marijuana. That test is going to have to look for levels in order to confirm that you don't violate the amount in your system in order to participate. So that's going to be something that's probably more frequent than even the criminal history check. But those two will be closely linked because you cross a limit, you could commit a crime. Sex offender, critical, continuously monitored, just like the two previous. And you get 2 hands raised from everybody at Uber and everybody at Lyft that this particular check be continuously looked at and modified so that it becomes almost like an alert service because of the industry that they serve. People in vulnerable positions in cars that are personally owned with people you don't know. But Uber and Lyft has to know them, and they have to know if these are the types of people who will prey on folks who get in their cars. The reference check, where you're going out trying to figure out from someone else if I'm going to be a good employee, out the window. Not relevant in the new economy. Employers will look to your transaction history. In the same way that we score Uber drivers and Uber drivers score you today, that will become more of a reference check than actually calling someone and checking to see if Mark's a good guy. We will have an aggregated score across all your platforms, and that will be the profile of who you are. Don't score a certain level, then you won't be able to get access to my premium services as a driver. I think that's how it's going to work. Employment history. Employment history and reference checks will be rolled into one and a part of that score. All of your transactions will be available to me to confirm and to look at whether or not there are incidents and to look at the final score. You will make it available to employers if you want to keep working. And all of those will be stored in a central location where it will travel with you from gig job to gig job. The OFAC check. It's critical now, it'll be critical in the future. The gig economy allows many more people to put on a mask and hide who they are. And they may have more nefarious reasons for wanting to have dark income. The OFAC check, when put into this futuristic platform where your identity is locked down, makes it easier for us to root out the bad guys. So that check remains. Certifications and credentials. Critical. It'll become more important in the future as part of a standard background check and not a part of a level 3 as we think about the future economy. Now, what's going to be different about it? We're not going to be looking for your standard credentials. Am I a doctor? Did I do this, do that? No, I'm going to be looking to see your skilled credentials. Are you proficient in a certain code language platform, blockchain, those sorts of things, because that's how I'm going to determine your cost per transaction as part of my gig economy platform. So it's going to be critically important that I confirm those skill capabilities and credentials when listed or included as part of your employment history. Education checks, where I confirm the dates that you attended an institution and whether or not you graduated. Of no value today because they don't confirm whether or not you have real skills. The skill check test that I talked about earlier will supplant that, and the education check will disappear from the face of the earth. MVRs, motor vehicle record checks, will be critical, and they will have to be nationalized so they become part of an alert service that's pumped into these platforms to let people know the minute you get a DUI, the minute you get points on your license and tickets, so that quick decisions can be made about you and whether or not to pull you off the platform. Suits, liens, and judgments, I think, will become part of the standard background check on the pre-employment side, because I want to know that kind of stuff now before I let you onto the platform, as opposed to a post-employment check that's used primarily for higher level executives. So those are the components we talked about earlier and how I think they're going to morph as we move deeper into the gig economy. So based on that, I think the level 1 check as we know it today will disappear, and that we'll be moving more towards different sources of data to confirm who you are, your identity, and whether or not you're socially fit to participate in gig economy transactions. So I think those new checks for a level 1 will be based more on social media verifications than on your traditional sources. The level 2 background check, which includes your biometric used at a state or local level, I think that will become more of the standard check. But here's how I think that's going to morph. I think everybody eventually is going to be given access to that. Right now, there's certain industries within the state level and federal level that are allowed to use the IAFIS databases. That's going to change. We need the comprehensive checks of statewide or nationwide checks when using a biometric for everyone in the gig economy when there's more faceless transactions. But here's what I think is going to be different. Tech companies are going to get together and create their own registry that has a biometric connected to it so that they can have the equivalent of some of the retail theft database that you see at some of the big chain stores, right? Where you steal something, they don't prosecute, they put your name and may put a fingerprint in a database and say, if you come back to this store, we catch you, we match your biometric, then we call the police. They'll have some sort of database like that will also have a biometric attached to it, and that will become just as critical as the IAFIS criminal database moving forward. And why would they want that? They'll want that because that gives them a lot more flexibility in terms of what they warehouse and the types of screens they can do if they have one that's independent of the government. The level 4, this will become part of the continuous monitoring capability. So all of those criminal histories, drug tests, all the pieces that are typically now considered an executive check, those become part of the continuously monitored components. Social media, drug test, criminal, we'll check those periodically based on industry standards and populate it back into the platform. So with everything that we've talked about, the changes to the background checks that are making it more difficult to get to the traditional information, the gig economy changes that are forcing fractures in the economy and changing the way employers have to think about the screen all push me back to where I started at the beginning of the podcast. That somebody is going to have to be a trusted third party that will be responsible for maintaining your identity, for saying you are who you say you are, you're real, and that you can participate in gig economy transactions across multiple companies in order to make this an efficient process where you don't overspend. And in my opinion, that's going to be the social media companies. Facebook already has more information about all of us than many of the traditional screening companies. Right? They're planning to launch a dating site. That's how much they know about you. So they are already a screening company, and they've recognized the flaws they have on their own platform because of the Russian hacking. According to Facebook, 290,000 accounts follow fake Russian accounts today. And they've tried to eliminate that, and they know only one answer will solve it: one-to-one recognition between an account and a user. And they may not do that for the current platform, but they will create a premium service for people looking to use their social media account as the key to unlock job applications. I know you're sitting there thinking, Mark, no, that'll never happen. Dude, you're already using Facebook and Twitter as a sign-on to many of these accounts today. If those accounts say you need a premium Facebook account in order to log in and have all of your applications immediately populated, screens already completed to fast track you through the hiring process? How many of you won't do it? See my point? And that's what's going to be needed if you are going to survive, and these companies are going to survive when dealing with transportation. Uber can't keep up with hiring enough folks with the transactions moving at the rate that they're moving. And even when they do staff up, getting them through the screening process still makes it almost impossible to keep up with demand. This is the way they're going to solve that. Don't think it can happen? You're still doubting it? Apple already has your face and your fingerprint. So they'll probably play a role in this platform as well. They have your credit card, your home address, and a tons of purchasing history that lets them know a lot about you and the people in your household. Right? Google, Microsoft are already pushing for this as part of smart cities to get access to your health records so that can be integrated into this platform. So that piece is already well underway. And if these social media companies do succeed, they're going to merge with the likes of Equifax to round out the picture of information they don't have, so that then they truly can be the key to unlock job applications and giving you the ability to carry your work histories, your social histories from job to job. Then the social media companies will team up with the public records companies and the screeners to just continuously monitor. And you'll pay for that. You pay for that as part of a premium account, and will authorize the partners that you work with to gain access to it. And the gig economy companies like Facebook and Twitter will warehouse all of this data and will provide the alerts to all the people who are on your list of trusted partners. So if you work for Deliveroo, Uber Eats, Uber, Lyft, none of them have to know you work for all of those other people. They just subscribe to your partner account, and whenever there's an issue, bing, they get notified, you get notified, and everybody's happy. So if you're working for those companies and you have a license to drive in Massachusetts and it's about to expire, 3 months before the platform's notifying you to get the process started, you approve it, pay the fee, they release the data to have the screens completed before the 3 months are over, and there's no interruption in service, so you continue to earn money. Pretty cool, huh? Right? The social media companies then, unfortunately, will create a score, because they always do, just like Equifax and TransUnion, and that will be used to let these partner companies know, who should I work with? Who should I pay more? Who should I pay less? Who should I give more rights and responsibilities to? What am I describing? Yes, a social media score. And China is already well underway to creating this with all the data sources that I'm talking about here. Yeah, they started in 2014, and they have about 20 million people already volunteering to work under this sort of paradigm. And it's going to happen here, because Facebook has already created a score. I don't think they're going to stop there. I think ultimately then they move to really using AI as a predictive tool to do everything I talked about in the opening. Companies are going to have you pre-screened and pre-predicted for jobs, and will make the offer to you ahead of time so that staffing flows a lot easier than it does today. And if you go as far as the Chinese and integrate data from neurocaps like they have there that monitor your mood and everything else, they'll be able to predict things like crime or days on when you're going to be less productive, so they can offer you days off. So a lot of this seems sci-fi hokey, but the data is already there, and the trends are aligning to these sorts of needs. And this is exactly where I think the future of background checks is going. I know all of you have different ideas and opinions, and may even have the correct answer, and I'd like to hear it. Follow me on Twitter at Gigging, Gigging, capital AND. Leave me your thoughts. Point me in the right direction if you think I'm wrong. I'd love to have a discussion with you, the audience, on the future of background checks. Also, we're going to be introducing a new segment to the show called Gigging News. It was originally entitled Gorillapreneur News on my other podcast, Gorillapreneur, The Art of Waging Small Business Warfare, but we're bringing that segment over here because it focuses exclusively on the sharing economy and gig economy news, which I think fits better here on this podcast. So it's going to be 20 to 25 minutes of news about the gigging economy, telling you about the companies and trends that are affecting it. Please subscribe and get more of this where I tell you about the future of an industry and then bring you up to date with what's going on in the sharing and gig economy. And if you love getting interviews from people who are driving the sharing and gig economy, subscribe to my other podcast, Gorillapreneur, The Art of Waging Small Business Warfare. Guys, it's been great. Thanks for tuning in, and tune in next time when I take on another industry and tell you exactly how the gig and sharing economy is going to shape the future. This is Gigging, Everything and the Sharing Economy, and I'm your host, Mark Anthony Peterson.